like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity podcast. And we're meeting with Fritz again. He's an interesting individual. And so we had a great conversation, last time with him, kind of about his background and history and that kind of stuff. And so, um, interesting people, Fritz, have many different um, topics that we could talk about. And so, the three topics that I was thinking about is your early years in business. So that was one. Another topic that I thought about was Amish, you being Amish. And so that was another one. And
Okay.
then another one was you had mentioned something about your wife had shared with you that she was thinking you guys might always be, you know, a little bit struggling. And so I was thinking the third one was, topic was family, family and how do you balance all of those things and business and all of that kind of stuff. There's always other ones like the spiritual life vision, some of the things you're passionate about. When you and I had our 2 hour conversation the first time, we went and covered so many different topics. And so, any of those kind of resonate with you, Fritz?
Well, um, I would say the first one, the early years in business, those are always fun to look back on. And sometimes when we do start to talk about it, I realize how fortunate I am or how fortunate I've been in the past. And normally during my day-to-day going about my business, I tend to forget those things. And I
Right.
think the more we think about the unique path that's behind us. When we look back, I think sometimes that helps us to remember that, oh my goodness, there's no way that could have been coming from me. That was from our that path was designed or governed by our creator. So it always helps me when I look back and think about all the fortunate things that have happened to me over the years. So I
Right.
never, I never mind going there, I should say.
Right. Like, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm like, how in the world did we survive that? I'm like, it's crazy. You look back and say, yep, we should have died then.
Yep.
Like, how did we survive then? One thing that, my dad, as I'd mentioned, I think in the first time, I grew up Baptist, very conservative. My dad was a pastor. And one thing that bugs me about Christian business owners is when I say, "So why are you successful?" And they say, "Well, I give God all the glory." And I get what they're saying, so but it irritates me because I think about when I was, younger and things were struggling and people would do that. I'm like, that doesn't help me as a business owner at all. Like, am I doing something bad because my business is struggling? So I get that we give God all the credit and He gets all the glory, but there are things that I think we've done. God's equipped us to do. Either gave us the mind or the body or whatever, or we did it out of desperation. I don't know. But anything I think for the business audience, you know, or even marriage and kids, I think that anytime we can get specifics with people and say, hey, here are some specific things you can do, I think that encourages people. And so some of those are, so let's dive into some of your early years, and you can start anywhere you'd like to, Fritz, on that.
I think, Mark, where I'll start is maybe a little bit of reflection. A couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to talk with another business owner from Ohio, and he got some things rolling in my mind. And the other afternoon, I was doing my chores, I was feeding my horses, and I was thinking about this. There's a bit of stigmatism, maybe more under the conservative people than under the non-conservative cultures on business success, and sometimes uh, conservative Christians, it almost seems like, well, I said there's a stigma, but it almost seems like there's a taboo on too much success. And as I'm thinking about this, we were discussing this is okay. Well, we were discussing growth. Is growth the product of our business or is growth a byproduct of our business? So my my mind started whirling and I'm thinking, okay, we try to do business in a Christian manner, and I think most businesses in the world like to do business with other businesses that operate in a Christian manner. We try to be honest and upright in all our doings. We try to present a great product and stand behind it and not overcharge and not undercharge. All those things lead to success, and success leads to more businesses wanting to do business with us, and it allows us to be more competitive. And it seems like it's this big circle where everything is kind of dependent on each other. But God, from the way I understand the Bible, that's how He wants us to do business. So if He
See,
wants us to do business that way, wouldn't He expect us to be successful,
right.
knowing that those business principles lead to other people wanting to do business with you?
See, this is, yeah, you tease and taunt me, and I like that. Like you trigger certain things in me. Like my wife and I, we once went ahead and we're kind of struggling. I taught the adult Sunday school class for 10 years, and I took a break, and somebody else was teaching it, and I was having a hard time really getting a lot out of it. So I asked the pastor, I said, "Hey, is it okay for a semester, for a quarter, if my wife and I go into your, study and she and I study together because we want the kids, we want to be a good example and bring them to Sunday school and stuff. But I'm not getting as much as I could." And he's like, "Absolutely." And I'm telling you, those were some of the most precious times when she and I were in there digging into the word. But what's interesting is the parable of the talents, the one, three, and five. And when you look at that, it's a lot. It's not like the Baptist taught it, I don't think. Like you look at that, and the one who had the one, they went ahead and said when he wasn't a good steward of it, when he didn't steward what he was given, like it took it and gave it to the one that had the five or the one that had the 10, then that's not politically correct, you know. and
No.
but then it says, "You foolish servant," and it cast him into outer darkness, which is like hell, you know. And so I've never heard that in a Baptist church before, where it's like, so if we don't steward what God's given us, we're going to hell. Like what? Like, I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying it's interesting. Ralph Miller, he is a very successful business guy, mentored me for a number of years, and he went ahead and said, Mark, Christians are looking for miracles, people healing, and this and this and this. He said, "This is what I look at as a miracle." He said, "A 16-year-old boy that's worthless at home, like his parents can't get him to do any work, and he goes works for a business, and that business turns him in to a productive member of society." He said, "That's a miracle." He said, "Business owners are miracle makers." He said, "Their ability to take things and take people's talents." And I thought, wow, I've never thought of that. And what's interesting is people like my dad was a full time pastor, and people like that's God's calling for his life. Um, but I think everybody has a calling, whether it's being a full time housewife, or whether you're a garbage man, or whether you're a business owner. And so I knew at a very young age, I was going to be a business owner. And so I think you're right. And I wonder if we don't have a proper fear of God. Like God gives us these talents, and if we don't use these talents, this is not going to go well for us.
Well, I think you're right. I think if we have that talent, boy, I would sure hate to meet my maker and say, "Hey," and he would say, "You know what? I let you be alive during the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century, maybe one of the most exciting business periods in the history of the world, and you, because you listened to peer pressure or people telling you that success is wrong, and because of traditions that you might have perceived, more important than my word, you didn't exercise those talents. And I was thinking along those lines the other day, and I thought, you know what, maybe he did know that we're going to be successful if we follow his principles. And I was a couple of years ago, I had to do a speech on success, and I was reading about success in the Bible, and there's I think they say there's like 2,400 verses in the Bible that talk about money.
Yeah.
The Bible
Y-
talks about money more than any other subject. Uh,
Yeah.
so I guess I came to the conclusion here just the other day that he does expect us to be successful. That's why we have that many warnings about being successful, about money and what it can do to us. Um, that's a so why would if he didn't expect us to be successful, didn't expect us to exercise our talents, utilize our talents, and I guess get close to that edge is always the way I look at it. Is if we get close to that edge, he wouldn't have thought we needed all that advice, and probably wouldn't be in the Bible. Maybe there'd be something else in there. I don't know.
See,
Uh,
this is what I think, that there's a vaccine. I think a lot of times Christians misquote the Bible and they say, money is the root of all evil. It's like, no, that's actually not what it says. It says the love of money. And so, my parents taught us tithing at a very young age. My grandfather said, if you can't tithe on a dollar, don't deceive yourself. You're not going to be able to tithe on a million. You just won't. You just
yeah,
can't. Like, it's not going to happen. And it's interesting what you said about, stewarding stuff. For years, I had thought, you know, it talks about God can use the stones to cry out. And for years, I thought, you'd mentioned about standing before your creator. And I don't know that a lot of people think about that. I do. I mean, I have for years. I'm like, when I stand before my creator, what's that going to go like?
no, I worry about that a lot because I see how much he's given me, and I know that there's going to be much required.
Right. So I thought, how embarrassing would it be to stand before a holy God and have a stone next to me and have the stone outproduce me? Like that would be not good. And I thought about that for years and years. And once I was at a men's group, and this guy was there, and he had done a 40-day fast. And I said to him, he and I were talking, and I said, we're talking, and I said, yeah, we've got like, I don't know, it's like 2,600 or more people who have expressed interest in spiritual things through the business. And he's like, really? And he's like, how do you help all of them? And all of a sudden, it's like the Holy Spirit just smacked me, and it was through computers, like we were using technology. And I'm like, well, where does technology come from? Well, it's the chips. Well, where do computer chips come from? Well, they come from sand. Well, where does sand come from? Comes from rocks. And I got this visual. I'm like, I wonder if God's just like shaking his head. And so those dumb human beings, I mean, I've given them, created in my image, and they're not producing. So you know what? I'm going to raise up rocks to outproduce them because they're not getting the job done. And I thought, huh, like,
You know, Mark, I've had the same visual of God up there looking down on us humans and just, puts his hand on his forehead, just kind of shakes his head and thinks, "Oh my goodness, what are
right?
they thinking?" But that's the way we are. He created us. He knows us. So I'm sure he's aware that we have many shortcomings. Uh, I'm going to back up a little bit, Mark. I want to talk about, you said that misquoted verse in the Bible about the love of money. There's another verse that, and I didn't realize this until 2 years ago. I was studying on something, and it's in multiple gospels. That part about where God says about how hard it is for a rich man to get into heaven. He said it'd be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yep.
Okay, in Mark, I think in the Gospel of Mark, I think that's about the 10th chapter, right around the 21st, 22nd, maybe 24th verse. And I don't think the other Gospels writers wrote this, but in Mark, it was the disciples that he was talking to. They were astounded. They said, "Well, God, who could then get into heaven?" Because they
Yep.
were surprised.
Yep.
And then he didn't. It was God came right back the next verse. I think maybe it's the same verse. He said the same thing, but he added a word, and I think it's very instructive to us. He said, "How hard is it?" The first time he said, "How hard is it for those that have riches to enter into the kingdom of heaven?" And then after the disciples asked him about that, I said, "Well, then who can enter?" And he said, "Well, how hard is it for those that trust in riches?" So, and when you start looking for that word trust, um, it's surprising how many times that trust in riches actually, when he said trusting in riches, he didn't talk about riches. He said trusting in riches. And I was caught off guard, and I thought, oh my goodness, I've been missing this all along. And it's kind of surprising when you read about it. And sorry, I kind of took you in a different direction here. I was thinking about
No.
that when you said that verse that gets misquoted, but I didn't realize that. And it was a day before I had a speech, and I was reading this, and I was like, huh, I'd never caught that, how he repeats himself. But, well, kind of like us humans, sometimes when we think we say something, but it gets taken, the wrong ways, then we clarify ourselves. And I think that's what happened with Jesus there. He said how hard it is for those that trust in riches to get into the kingdom of heaven. And
Right.
later, Paul was making some of the same comments, talking about people that trust in riches. So, um,
And seeing this was this interesting one of Malcolm Gladwell's book. I'm not sure if it's Outlier. I think it's Outliers, but it could be the tipping point. But one of them he talks about where if you're wealthy, it's harder to raise children if you're wealthy, and I can see that. Um, so how do you teach them the work ethic? How do you teach them faith? Because there's so much faith, and it's interesting because my children are fourth generation Christians, and so when we were younger, I noticed, I said, first generation Christians tend to have a lot of zeal, like they're on fire. They don't know a lot, but boy, they're on fire. Second generation Christians, their parents that are first generation said, "Hey, I got to take you to Sunday school and teach all this stuff." So second generation Christians tend to know a lot scripturally. First generations don't because they weren't raised in it. And but their passion goes down. Third generation, all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, why is this? And then the fourth generation, it's lost. And so I've noticed that fourth generation, it's often lost. And so, like, how do I help my kids not lose that? And so, yeah, where you and I go, man, we can go down this path, and all of those things I think are good, Fritz, because like I think a lot of times people segment their lives and they put, here's a box and here's a box and here's a box and everything's in a different box. I think, I might look at the world a little differently and say, well, everything's interconnected.
well, Mark, I think one of the ways that you don't lose that is uh, there's this saying, preach the gospel if necessary, use words. Um, and I think that's that's easy. How should I say I shouldn't say it's easy, but it might, our business can be almost our pulpit, or it can be our Sunday school, but not our Sunday school, but our 6 days a week um, school on how to live out Christian life. And it's difficult sometimes, when a customer doesn't pay you, or when they treat you wrong, or employee problems, or machines break down. How do you display that faith and that calm and that trust in Jesus Christ during those periods? Just like a farmer, how does he display that trust in Jesus Christ when a storm comes through and takes down his beautiful wheat field that looks so beautiful at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and one thunderstorm later it's flat on the ground? I think that's where children learn or see their parents and their reactions. And I think that's where they can, that's how we can teach our children our trust in God, or that resilience, that faith that, it's going to be okay. God is in control. We're fine with what He brought to us. We're gonna continue laboring on. We're gonna do the best we can. Is that how you get that Christianity to the fourth generation? Because I think it's difficult to just do it on Sunday or in Sunday school or on Wednesday afternoons, and
Well, and
just
I
read.
think it's getting harder. I think every generation, it's harder than the previous generation. A lot, I think, is technology. And so it gets in and it permeates, and it's like you can't avoid it. I think going back to the salvation stuff, and like how do you, like childlike faith, it talks about like if we don't have the faith of a child. And so a child has tremendous faith just naturally and tremendous curiosity. I think the vaccine against loving money is, giving it away. I think tithing it and beyond tithing it, when we do that, that I think that that's a vaccine that helps us to where we're not lovers of money. Um, it's interesting because Ralph Miller, we were having challenges with one of our adult children after they had left the home, and really at a crossroads, and didn't know what to do as a father. And he said to me, he said, Mark, there's things that God gives you that you need to do. You need to do those things and not have God do your job. I said, okay. And then he said, and then there's things that God needs to do. And they're not your job, they're God's job. And you need to not allow God to do your job, and you need to not try to do God's job. And I mean, it was like the passage in Proverbs about apples of gold and silver and all that kind of stuff. Like I could just feel like this is exactly what I needed. And I got excited. I said, so Ralph, that's awesome. That's exactly what I needed. How do I know the difference? And I was probably in my mid 40s, and he was like in his maybe late 60s, early 70s. And I said, so how do I know the difference? He laughs. He says, oh, I don't know that answer. And and so part of me was really encouraged, because I'm like, okay, there is a difference. Like when I'm watching my grandchildren and one of them has a dirty diaper, if my wife or one of the daughters are there, somebody else can change it. They'll change it. Grandpa knows how to change it, and he can. He's changed it a lot. But I thought, how silly would it be for me to say, I'm going to trust God to change one of my grandkids' diapers? Like, he could do it, but he probably wouldn't do that. And so that's kind of taking it to an extreme. And then but the struggle, so for the last 15 years, like when it says working out your salvation, what does that mean? I'm pretty confident it's not doing good works. I mean, that would make no sense at all. Like, why would Christ have had to die? Like, like, so it makes no sense. You can work your way to heaven. So I don't think it's doing good works that's going to get us to heaven. I'm pretty confident about that. But I think it's if we don't struggle, if we're just like, well, salvation, yeah, God just like if we're not like Abraham, he wrestled with God. Like if like you're wrestling with God, I'm wrestling with God, and I'm saying, what does it mean? And it seems like, Fritz, it's almost like with our kids, that as our kids get older, we expect them to do more. And I wonder if, as we get older spiritually, that God expects us to do more. Like when the three Amish teenagers died from, from the asphyxiation in the car, and I didn't know them. I didn't know them. I didn't know their family. But when I heard about it, my heart broke. Like I was just, I teared up, and Elaine went ahead and said to my wife, she says, I'm concerned about Mark. And Rosanna said, why is that? And she's like, it seems like he's taking too much ownership of that situation. I mean, he didn't know the kids, he didn't do anything. And Rosanna just kind of laughed, said, that's kind of Mark. And I
Yeah.
thought, like those parents, those siblings, the cousins and the friends, there's not going to be a day that goes by that there's not going to be a memory of some type. And I think there's a strength to say, we're going to trust God, but then I think there can be a laziness that comes with that, where it's like, well, it's God's will. And is it? I mean, the Baptists are taught there's the perfect will of God, and then there's the permissive will of God. And they're pretty different.
Okay, that's interesting. I never knew that about the Baptist way of thinking. That you say it's the perfect will of God, and then what was the other one? Permissive?
The permissive will of God. So our oldest son, Jonathan, he was 30 years old 4 years ago, and he died of suicide. And
I'm sorry.
so, yeah. So it's been let's say, an interesting 4 years, and it was a rifle shot to the head, so really hard. And our 19-year-old son was 4 feet away from him in the room. And so that was not God's perfect will for him to do that. But it was God's permissive will. I love that kid, and he was a friend and an amazing son and a business partner. And, I miss him every day. Um, but he made stupid choices. Like, it's just like, he just made stupid choices. He didn't, like, we taught him, hey, don't drink. You just don't. And it overcame him. And, so as a whole combination of a whole bunch of different things. And it's just, so I hurt. I just hurt. And so I work with a lot of young Amish, and, they're in Room Springer, and I'm like, listen, like I realized at the age of 15, I had an addictive personality. So I made a choice at 15 not to ever taste alcohol or drugs or even coffee. I've never even had a drink of coffee in 60 years. So that's just my choice. I'm just saying. And so I realized something at the age of 15, and I tried to teach my kids that same thing. And if Jonathan had heeded his father's advice, the alcohol was not the only factor, but it was a massive factor in his suicide. And my heart goes out, like, to my wife and my 6 other kids and the 10 grandkids. But then I can feel the pain of poor choices. And I'm like, I think there's a way, like, to take his story or take the 3 stories of the kids and say, listen, you shouldn't be drinking. I'm just telling you, like, it's foolishness. And you can't control it. You think you can control it, and you can't. It can get out of control so fast. And I think, our podcast, like, if those three kids, because there's other kids out there that are doing the same type of choices. If they heard this podcast, it's like, it's just not worth it. Or if my son, if this podcast had been around when he was younger, 15, 16, 17, 20, maybe if he would have heard it, he would have changed his direction. So there's nothing I can do about my son's physical life or the 3 Amish kids' physical life. There's nothing I can do. That is past. But I know that there's other people like my son. I know there's other people like those 3 teenagers. And if we could get the message out to them and say, listen, you know, you don't know what it can do to you. And I think we can prevent that. We can impact that. I don't know. My heart just goes to the families. And
Well,
I think it's harder and harder to know as a parent, what do you do to help your kids? So, Fritz, this is
but
always good. Look forward to our next one. Any closing comments or thoughts that you have?
I'm just, yeah, I'm sitting here trying to process what you told me about your son. It just, it hurts me to hear that. I know the love that parents have for their children, and how much it hurts when we see them make terrible choices. And I can't fathom, I cannot fathom the permanence
Right?
of
That's the
your son's
hardest thing.
choice.
That's the hardest thing. There's after he died, it's like there's no more new memories. Like it is permanent, and you're less like,
Yeah.
so yeah, maybe in another podcast we can unpack that more and I can tell the story, of him being a little boy and some of the patterns that I saw in him, that I saw the risk. Like it wasn't a shock. It wasn't, I mean, he was at the best time he had been in his life. So that was shocking because I thought he had gone beyond that. But if the story can help other parents or other kids, then I want that story to be told because kids don't realize if he knew the amount of hurt and pain for his parents and his siblings and even the grandkids, his nieces and nephews. Like, so, anyways, if you're listening to the rebroadcast of this, and if you're a teenager or a young adult, or you're having challenges with depression or maybe alcohol or drug stuff, we'll give you a phone number you can reach out to. And if you're a parent and your kids are heading down a path and you're like, I know they're heading down a path and this is not going to be good, and I am clueless as a parent as what to do. If you're in either of those situations, let's give you a couple phone numbers you can reach out to. One is 630-393-9909. That's 630-393-9909. There's also a toll-free number, 888-230-2300. That's 888-230-2300. And that's through Life Masteries Institute, which is a nonprofit organization, and some other groups of volunteers and people that love to, be with you and kind of give you some suggestions and some help, and on both sides of the spectrum. And always remember, we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye bye.